Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the frosty corridors of an 18th century Polish monastery where your robes are scratchy, your breath fogs the air, and the only thing stronger than the cold is the scent of something roasting, though it's not quite coffee, not yet. Wooden floorboards creak beneath your sandaled feet as you shuffle toward the warmth of the kitchen, guided by a single flickering oil lamp and the sleepy chant of a brother rehearsing psalms through a half-dash yawn. This isn't a palace of indulgence. Here, your morning luxuries are stale rye bread, an awkwardly carved spoon, and a hot cup of ... Lentils. Yes, lentils. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love hearing where you're watching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The kitchen smells faintly of damp stone, burnt grain, and something oddly smoky. You duck your head beneath a low arch and enter a space where centuries of soot have painted the ceiling a deep, velvety black. A monk stirs something in a battered copper pot, the motion slow, steady, almost meditative. He doesn't greet you. He only gestures to a bench and returns to his stirring. This is morning in a Camaldolese monastery, deep in the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's sometime around the 1740s, give or take a war. Outside, snow gathers in the courtyard. Inside, a small iron stove radiates just enough warmth to keep your fingertips flexible. You cradle a rough ceramic mug in your hands. It's warm. It's brown. It's slightly bitter. But it is not coffee. Not the kind you're used to. Anyway. Real coffee Arabica, imported, expensive, exists, yes. But here, behind thick monastery walls, a pound of it costs more than a month's worth of wax candles. Coffee is for nobility, travelers, traders, maybe the occasional bishop with connections. For you, for the average monk sworn to poverty, obedience, and occasional culinary suffering, there is lentil brew, and honestly, ... It's not that bad. At least not when your expectations are subterranean. Outside, the sun crests lazily over the Carpathian foothills, barely bothering to thaw the icicles dangling from your cell window. You sip slowly, letting the brews heat trickle down your throat. The flavor is ... earthy, smoky, a hint of something nutty if you concentrate, and a definite undercurrent of what have I done to deserve this. Still, it's warm. It's consistent. And in a place where silence is sacred and novelty is suspect, it's become a treasured ritual. You sit beside the monk, who's still stirring without pause. His hood conceals most of his face, but his hands are visible cracked, pink with cold and utterly calm. They know this brew like they know prayer. He lets it steep, adds a dash of carob powder luxury, and finally pours another ladleful into your cup. No sugar, no milk, just this humble lentil concoction. Somehow, with the morning light beginning to filter through stained glass, it tastes better the second time. The monastery itself isn't grand. A cluster of pale stone buildings arranged like careful puzzle pieces, wrapped in forest and fog. Bells toll every few hours, not to wake you, but to anchor you. The rhythms of life here are fixed. Prayer, silence, work, sleep. And this brew, strange as it seems, is stitched into that rhythm like a seam you barely notice until it frays. You wonder who thought of it first. Which monk looked at a bag of dried lentils and thought, yes, that's what I'll roast and drink. Historians still argue whether it began out of desperation or discipline. Some say it was simply necessity. Coffee prices had spiked due to Ottoman blockades, and monasteries adapted like they always did. Others argue it was theological. Caffeine, seen as potentially indulgent, had to be approached with caution. Better to simulate the ritual without succumbing to the bean itself. But regardless of motive, the result was the same. A slow, quiet culture of make-believe coffee rooted in patience, repetition, and a monkish sense of humor. That humor, by the way, is drier than your mug. The monk beside you finally speaks, in a whisper that carries more irony than reverence. Better than water, he says. Worse than sin. And that's about the highest praise you'll hear all day. Outside, the snow begins to fall again. Light and lazy. A bell chimes softly. Somewhere, a novice mutters about a missing robe. And here in the warmth of the kitchen, you sip the last of your lentil brew, the grains collecting at the bottom like a tiny earthy sediment, and feel oddly at peace. The day will be long. Silent meals, cold chores. 3 hours copying psalms. Onto parchment with a quill that insists on breaking. But for now, there's comfort in the routine. In the strange alchemy of legumes becoming coffee. In the way even the most mundane ritual can become sacred if repeated enough times. Close your eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to pause, to savor, to forget, briefly, that you're drinking soup masquerading as espresso. You're not just a visitor anymore. You're part of the rhythm. The slow brewing, long-suffering, quietly caffeinated rhythm of monastic life. The lentil brew may warm your belly, but it's your curiosity that keeps you seated a while longer. Because really, how on earth did this come to be the default drink of choice in a place that prides itself on centuries-old rituals? You glance at the pile of dried legumes on the counter, small, beige, and entirely unremarkable. Lentils. You've seen them in soup, maybe in a rustic stew if you're feeling adventurous. But coffee? The monk notices your gaze and gives a knowing shrug, as if to say, it's not ideal, but it's what we've got. Lentils were cheap. That's the first thing to understand. Not just affordable, but laughably abundant. They grew well in Poland's temperamental climate, stored easily through harsh winters, and didn't require complicated trade agreements to acquire. In short, they were humble. And humility is practically a second habit around here. Monasteries were expected to operate with frugality. Coffee, imported from Arabia or the Ottoman Empire, carried a price tag that most abbots couldn't justify. Especially not when those same funds could buy candles, parchment, or precious soap. A luxury no one talked about, but everyone appreciated. And so, someone no one knows who, though you'd like to imagine it was a particularly cheeky. Novice roasted lentils over an open flame, ground them down, and added hot water out of sheer stubbornness. The result was not delicious, but it was passable. It looked like coffee. It smelled vaguely like it, especially if you leaned in and squinted your nose. And most importantly, it gave the illusion of participation in a broader European ritual. You see, coffee in the 18th century wasn't just a drink. It was a thing, a trend, a social movement. Coffee houses had begun popping up from London to Warsaw, filled with the smell of burnt beans, political murmurs, and the faint sound of a lute in the background. Drinking coffee meant engaging with the world. Lentil brew, in its very modest way, allowed monks to feel part of that world while remaining cloistered inside their silent walls. And let's not forget fasting. Yes, fasting. The bane and badge of monastic life. Depending on the order and the season, monks could find themselves limited to 1 or 2 meals a day, and those meals weren't exactly lavish. Meat? Forbiddance. Dairy? Occasionally. Beer? Surprisingly common. But coffee or its many substitutes found a special loophole in the rules. Beverages weren't considered meals. As long as it was liquid and didn't contain chunks of meat or potatoes the size of confessionals, It was technically permitted, and so the lentil brews slid into the daily schedule with almost ecclesiastical ease. Brewed after morning prayer, shared in silence, consumed slowly, not because it was scalding hot, but because, frankly, you needed time to psych yourself up. Drink it like it's penance, one monk jokes. You can't tell if he's serious. The monks even had names for it. Not kawali, a Polish word for real coffee, but things like Czarna Pokora, black humility, or Pakuta w Filigance, penance in a cup. The nicknames varied, but the sentiment remained. This drink wasn't meant to impress your taste buds. It was meant to remind you of your vows. Still, you can't help but admire the creativity. Because while lentils were the default base, they weren't the only experimental bean on the menu. Monks occasionally blended in chickpeas, acorns, even ground up dandelion roots. Each batch came with its own strange flavor, like a surprise quiz for your tongue. Historians still argue whether this was culinary innovation or desperate coping. Some manuscripts from the period list detailed recipes for coffee-like infusions, complete with roast times, grinding methods, and serving instructions. Others suggest these brews were strictly for times of need, which in monastic parlance could mean anything from supply shortages to spiritual crisis. You watch as another monk takes over the stove, adjusting the flame under the copper pot. He adds a dash of something powdery, roasted barley maybe. The scent changes subtly, growing darker, deeper. More like real coffee. You nod appreciatively. He raises an eyebrow and mutters, "For the illusion." It's a little like performance art, you realize. A sensory illusion built on layers of smell, color, and texture. Everything but the caffeine. Ah, yes, caffeine. There's none here of course, you can feel it, or rather, you feel its absence. No jitters, no alertness. Just a mild warmth and the creeping desire to nap on a hay-filled mattress. The monks didn't mind. If anything, they welcomed it. Sleep was not an enemy in this place, it was a gentle, compliant guest. Still, caffeine was missed by some. A few orders quietly traded for it, disguising shipments as medicinal herbs. Others argued against its use entirely, suggesting it stirred the blood too much and distracted from prayer. You step outside with your mug and watch the courtyard fill with slow-moving figures. Brown robes flap in the breeze. Snowflakes drift from the sky like tiny white feathers. The day has begun, and yet it feels like it's still dreaming. You sip again. The brew has cooled. It tastes a bit like soil now, with a hint of burnt toast. But somehow, it fits the moment. Like wet wool socks on a rainy hike, it's not pleasant, but it's right. A novice walks past, offers you a piece of barley bread, and asks in a whisper if you've tried adding salt to your brew. You nod politely, though you're not sure that would help. He shrugs. Some say it brings out the lentil. Others say it brings out regret. But in this quiet world of patient repetition, even a strange drink made from legumes has its place. It anchors the morning. It softens the silence. It reminds you that even the humblest ingredient, when treated with care, can become something close to sacred. You head back inside, following the scent of roasting that now permeates the monastery stone halls like incense from a particularly earthy mass. There's a rhythm to this place, and it's not just in the liturgical chants or tolling bells, it's in the cooking, the stirring, the quiet compromise of making something out of nothing, again and again. This is where you begin to understand that the lentil brew wasn't just about money or fasting, it was about austerity as creativity. Poverty, in these walls, wasn't considered a burden so much as an invitation. The monks took their vow of poverty with the same sincerity you might apply to a lease agreement or a dental plan. It shaped their every choice, and perhaps nowhere more strangely than in their coffee. It's hard to imagine in your modern kitchen with its electric kettle and oat milk options. that a small monastic order in 18th century Poland had no such luxuries. Imports were limited. Colonial trade lines were long, winding, and tangled in wars. So when real coffee did arrive, if it arrived, it often came stale, bitter, and marked up by 3 middlemen and a bishop's cousin who owned a wagon dot, so they roasted what they had. And what they had besides prayers and root vegetables was time. A monk leads you to a small, smoke-blackened annex behind the kitchen. It's a room no larger than a pantry, with drying herbs hanging from the rafters and a rudimentary roasting rig fashioned from a spinning drum over a fire. No one speaks. The only sound is the hiss and pop of lentils tumbling inside, charring slowly to a dark, convincing brown. The monk turns the crank with one hand and sprinkles something into the fire with the other, a twist of dried apple peel. The smoke changes scent. It smells warmer, almost comforting. A poor man's cinnamon. You watch the lentils darken, wrinkle, almost curl at the edges like tiny roasted beans. They don't look appetizing. They look tired. And that's somehow appropriate. He lifts the lid, gives a slow, appraising nod, and pours the roasted lentils onto a wooden tray to cool. You're invited to help, and by help, he means blow on them gently to keep them from burning further. You do so, feeling slightly ridiculous and slightly honored. Every roast is different, he murmurs, like every psalm. He says it without irony, and you begin to believe him. Once cooled, the lentils are ground coarsely, using a hand-cranked mill that seems designed to test the triceps of saints. You crank it slowly, the sound of crushed legumes echoing like distant gravel underfoot. The grind is uneven, speckled with larger bits that will no doubt lend an extra crunch to your next sip. The water, meanwhile, is boiling in an iron pot that could double as a baptismal font. It takes time. Everything here takes time. You're beginning to see that that's the point. Somewhere across the corridor, a novice drops a bucket with a clang. No one reacts. Even the pigeons in the rafters seem unfazed. You keep cranking, and the monk beside you begins humming a low, tuneless thing that settles in your chest like sleep, trying to sneak back in. There's something oddly beautiful about this simplicity, about using what's available, not out of defeat, but out of devotion. Monks weren't trying to replicate Starbucks. They weren't chasing perfection. They were, in their own quietly stubborn way, exploring the sacred art of close enough. And let's be honest, it was better than some of the alternatives. Historical records mention hot brown drinks made from toasted bread crusts, overcooked peas, and even scorched carrot shavings. One particularly daring order in the Czechlands reportedly infused their brew with smoked trout scales. Whether that was for flavor or penance is still up for debate. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these coffee imposters represented cultural resistance to global trends or simple geographic necessity. Some monasteries actively resisted foreign imports, suspicious of anything that arrived with a tax or a translator. Others just couldn't afford the real thing and made do with creative concoctions that blurred the line between beverage and bold experiment. You taste the newest batch. It's not better, but it's different, deeper, smokier. The apple peel didn't quite make it taste like cinnamon, but it did add something soft to the bitterness. Something almost sweet. Almost. The monks take their cups in silence and sit in their usual spots along the benches, by the windows facing the garden. You join them, feeling the wood creak beneath you and the steam fogging your face. No one talks. The wind whistles through the slats in the shutters like an indecisive flute. The brew cools quickly in the Polish winter air. You reflect, as your tongue tries to make sense of the liquid in your mouth, on how necessity births tradition. This strange drink born of scarcity, shaped by ritual, had become, in its own modest way, a piece of culture. Not famous, not celebrated, but quietly preserved in centuries of morning routines. And there's something in that silence shared between a dozen souls, sipping lentils from chipped mugs that feels more connective than 1,000 words. You begin to understand how, in this place, even hardship becomes part of the liturgy. The monk beside you slurps softly and lets out a single satisfied sigh. You mimic him. It feels earned. Later that day, you find yourself wandering through the herb garden behind the monastery bare now, cloaked in snow and frost, but with a careful structure that hints at warmer, busier months. Raised beds. Faded wooden markers for chamomile, sage, lovage. You brush a gloved hand over a brittle stalk and try to imagine this place in summer, alive with the sounds of bees and the low murmur of monks debating compost ratios. You're not just strolling for fresh air. You're following the path of coffee, or rather, how coffee almost came here. It's strange to think that a bean grown thousands of miles away could become such a powerful force in the rituals of Europe. But by the early 18th century, coffee had become more than a beverage. It was a symbol of worldliness. The Ottoman Empire had introduced it to the continent, and it spread with a quiet urgency, slipping into the habits of scholars, merchants, and royalty, but not monks. Not at first. You turn a corner, duck under a sagging trellis, and find a crooked bench dusted with snow. A good spot to sit and think, because for all its later ubiquity, coffee's entrance into Poland was slow, uncertain, and filtered through layers of suspicion. Clergy worried about its effects too stimulating, too exotic, too foreign. Was it a drink or a vice? Did it awaken the spirit or distract it? Historians still argue whether early resistance to coffee in Eastern Europe was theological or simply logistical. Perhaps it was both. The journey from Yemen to Krakow was no small feat. By the time beans arrived, they were often stale, moldy, or priced so high they might as well have been powdered gold. Monasteries, governed by vows of simplicity, couldn't justify the cost or the optics. After all, what would the faithful think if Brother Ignacy started every morning with a steamy mug of foreign luxury, while peasants boiled beet tops for tea? So instead, the monks looked inward. They turned to what was local, humble, and plentiful: lentils, chickpeas, barley, rye. And they copied what they heard of the coffee ritual, the roast, the grind, the dark liquid served in silence, but made it their own. A sort of monastic theater of the bean. You rise from the bench and head toward the storage cellar, where sacks of dried legumes line the shelves like quiet soldiers. The air is cool and still, thick with the scent of earth and dust. The flickering torchlight reveals labels inked by hand: lentils, chickpeas, flax, acorns. Coffee is here too. Just one small bag, marked carefully. Kawa Prawdziwa real coffee. You pick it up. It's light, rare, saved, probably, for a bishop's visit or a particularly long winter fast. But here's a curious thing. Some monasteries did use the real stuff, once in a while. They even documented it in their kitchen ledgers with a kind of reluctant reverence. In one Benedictine record from the 1760s, coffee is referred to as a warming tonic suitable for the aged brethren. Another Franciscan monk, writing in careful Latin, described it as a dark infusion that hastens contemplation. You picture that scene. Two old monks, knees wrapped in wool, sipping cautious spoonfuls of actual coffee, unsure whether it's healing them or simply making their thoughts too fast for scripture. Back in your monastery kitchen, you lift the lid of the roasting pan. It's empty now, but the scent of yesterday's batch lingers bitter and toasted with a whisper of something herbal. You've begun to crave it, in a way. Not the taste, but the ritual. The slow roast, the quiet grind. The pouring, the sitting, the sipping. The shared silence. There's something calming in the constraint. When you remove choice, when you surrender luxury, you're left only with the process. And maybe that's the point. Coffee, real or fake, becomes not a stimulant, but a slow invitation to awareness. A meditation in a mug, a bell chimes. Not the big iron one, but a small handheld bell used to summon monks to minor duties. You follow. The sound through a narrow corridor into the refectory-long wooden tables, plain linen runners, wooden bowls neatly stacked. Each monk has their place, and at each place a steaming mug. Some made with lentils, others with rye or barley. None with coffee. You take your seat, fingers wrapped around the cup, and inhale deeply. It smells ... The same as always. Bitter, nutty, not unpleasant. The room is hushed but not stiff. There's a kind of sleepy camaraderie among these men. A shared understanding that life here is built from small sacrifices and quiet victories. The abbot takes a sip and closes his eyes. A long pause, then a small smile. You get the sense he's remembering something, a rare morning, perhaps, when he once had the real thing. Or maybe he's just savoring the lentil illusion for what it is. A novice beside you whispers, "I heard Vienna has cafes with velvet chairs." You nod solemnly, and sugar. He sighs. The monks begin to eat. Bread, porridge, stewed apples with too many cloves. You sip between bites, letting the bitterness of the brew balance the sweetness of the fruit. It works better than you expected. You almost believe it, and that's the beauty of it. This isn't a parody of coffee. It's something else entirely. A quiet cousin. A humble nod to a larger world, filtered through the lens of scarcity and devotion. The meal ends. The mugs are gathered. The room empties. You linger for a moment longer, finishing the last cold mouthful. It tastes faintly of smoke and discipline. The next morning, before the sun has even decided whether it's worth showing up, you find yourself back in the kitchen, drawn not by hunger or duty, but by the slow crackle of roasting and the promise of that strange, bitter comfort in a cup. It's peaceful here before the monastery fully wakes. Just you, the embers, and a few scurrying mice debating theology in the rafters. Today's batch is a little different. Brother Thomas, who oversees the kitchen with the weary precision of a man who has counted out exactly 17,000 lentils too many. In his lifetime is trying something new, lentils and barley, half and half, roasted with a pinch of dried chicory. For complexity, he says, as if you're about to judge it for a Michelin star. You help stir the roasting pan, careful not to let anything burn. Burnt barley, you're learning, smells exactly like guilt. The process has become familiar. Roast, cool, grind, steep. There's no rush. The heat from the stove seeps into your bones like an old story. You move slowly, not just because it's early, but because it feels appropriate. A sort of reverence, even if what you're revering is just breakfast. Once it's done, Brother Thomas hands you a cup without comment. The mug is chipped, of course, and faintly smells like elderflower from whatever was last in it. You sit by the frost-laced window and sip. This blend is deeper, darker. The barley adds a kind of bread-like roundness, and the chicory flirts with bitterness in a way that makes you think of coffee. Not real coffee, but a cousin who studied abroad. Still, you're curious. How did they roast lentils to taste even remotely like coffee? It turns out the technique mattered. Monks discovered that slow roasting over hardwood coals brought out hidden notes, nutty, toasted, occasionally smoky. They'd stir constantly with a flat wooden paddle, watching for the moment the lentils turned from pale to golden to dark brown. Any darker and you got ashes. Any lighter and the flavor was, let's say, unconvincing. Some added herbs, thyme, even rosemary to influence the aroma. Others soaked the lentils in malted barley water before roasting, infusing them with a subtle sweetness that wouldn't break the fast. The rules were flexible. The results were, at best, mildly satisfying. But that was enough, because the drink wasn't meant to impress your senses. It was meant to anchor your morning. You take another sip. Still warm. Still weirdly comforting. The idea of substituting ingredients wasn't unique to Poland. Across Europe, monks and peasants alike were experimenting with what might char and steep acceptably. In Germany, roasted dandelion roots gained a reputation for being the poor man's espresso. In France, acorns were crushed and boiled into a nutty, tannic drink that, if you closed your eyes, might fool you for a second. Might. Historians still argue whether these substitutes were born purely from necessity or if they reflected a deeper, monastic discipline, a quiet resistance to indulgence, a way to align the body with the soul through even the smallest choices. After all, what better way to practice humility than to pretend your lentil soup is a Parisian roast? You wander back, toward the cloisters, cup in hand, watching your breath curl in the cold air. The stone corridors hum faintly with wind. The monastery isn't grand, but it has a quiet gravity to it, thick walls that have outlasted empires, doors that creak like they're remembering something. You settle onto a bench outside the scriptorium, where a monk is already hunched over. A sheet of vellum, carefully illuminating a capital L with lapis blue. He nods at your mug. Is it the barley blend today? He asks. You nod. He grimaces. Yesterday's was better. You grin. Even among men of silence and sacrifice, taste buds have opinions. Nearby, another brother is sweeping snow from the cloister steps. His broom is more stick than bristle. He pauses, stretches his back, and takes a long, thoughtful sip from his own cup. Then he goes right back to sweeping, like this moment of warmth is all the break he needs. You finish your brew slowly. The last sip is the strongest, the darkest. A few stray grounds settle at the bottom like silt in a forgotten river. You swirl them absently, imagining them as tiny history's remnants of meals and mornings, whispered prayers and stubborn experiments, because that's what this drink really is, a quiet testament to adaptation. To monks who looked around their kitchens and thought, well, we've got lentils. Let's see what happens. You imagine their first attempts burnt, watery, probably hilarious. And yet, they kept trying. Not because they believed they could recreate coffee exactly, but because something about the process felt worth doing. Like carving a walking stick from a crooked branch, or humming a tune you barely remember imperfect, but yours. You set your mug on the windowsill and watch the light creep higher in the sky. Today, you're helping in the garden. The earth is frozen solid, but there are tools to clean, compost to stir, seeds to sort. The work is quiet, repetitive, honest. Like the brew. You give the mug a gentle tap just once and walk away, the ghost of warmth still resting on your tongue. By midday, the wind picks up over the monastery walls, curling through cracks in the stone like it's nosing around for secrets. You're outside, stomping snow off your sandals, because your next stop isn't the garden or the scriptorium, it's the kitchen again. But this time, you're here not just to drink, but to watch a pot bubble over fire. You step in as another monk is already bent over a large cast iron cauldron, steam rising into his face like a damp curtain. He's muttering a psalm something about the voice of many waters, which feels oddly appropriate for what's happening in the pot. This, you realize, is the full brewing process. You've roasted, you've ground, but you haven't yet experienced what happens when those crushed lentils meet boiling water. Brother Marek hands you a ladle. He gestures to the pot. Time to stir. You lean over cautiously. The smell is richer than you expected. The roasted lentils, combined with barley and a pinch of carob, are steeping in what looks like muddy water, but smells surprisingly warm, toasted, maybe even a little nutty. The scent is somewhere between oatmeal, burnt toast, and a good story halfway told. Don't let it settle, Marek says. The grounds like to rest. You have to keep waking them up. Which, you think, is an oddly poetic metaphor for this. Whole endeavor. You stir slowly, watching the color darken. The lentils break down a bit, softening into the swirl. The barley adds body, and the carob lends a whiff of something vaguely sweet if you squint your nose. Once the brew is deep enough in color, Marek ladles it through a cloth filter and into a clay pitcher. It drips slowly, the cloth capturing stray grounds and grains. The smell fills the room like a memory you don't quite recognize but want to linger in, and then comes the mug. He pours you a cup, hands it over with a soft grunt, and waits. You sip, slowly, warmth first, then smoke. Then that earthy, persistent lentil flavor with a faint whisper of something toasted and oddly endearing. The carob helps, it rounds the bitterness, nudges the whole thing toward palatable. Just barely. You nod. Not bad. Marek grunts again. You think it might be his version of a smile. This boiling, it turns out, is more than just making the drink. It's part of the ritual. Something about the hissing pot, the stirring, the filtering, each step has its own rhythm. You wonder how? Many times Marek has done this. Hundreds? Thousands? Does it ever get easier? You ask. He looks at you, then at the pot. The stirring or the living? You don't ask, which he meant. The process of boiling lentil coffee was surprisingly precise for such a humble drink. Too little heat, and the brew stays watery. Too much, and you scorch the grounds. Some monasteries use double boilers. Others placed hot stones into the pot to control the temperature like culinary alchemy. One pebble at a time. Historians still debate how standardized this practice was. Some claim it varied by region, others by individual cook. In one Dominican monastery near Lublin, documents mention a coffee priest, a monk who specialized in brewing despite the lack of beans. Whether this was a legitimate role or a running joke among the brethren remains delightfully unclear. You take a second sip. It's grown stronger. You catch a note of bitterness that clings to the back of your throat, not unpleasant, just persistent, like a hymn stuck in your head. Marek tops up your cup without asking. Tomorrow, he says, we're trying chickpeas. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Sometimes you have to chase novelty, even in the cloister. Outside, the bell tolls for none, the mid-afternoon prayer. The sound echoes through the courtyard, stirring birds from the eaves. The monks begin to gather in pairs and threes, their brown habits blending into the snow-dusted stone like shadows with purpose. You stand, still holding your mug, still sipping. You follow the others to the chapel, the drink warming your belly, like a small, stoic companion. And as you walk, you realize something. This isn't about taste anymore. It's about pause, about presence, about sipping something you helped make, even if it's not perfect. Especially because it's not perfect. And when you sit in the chapel, and the chant begins low and slow and slightly off-key, you feel that same quiet repetition, that same gentle boiling over of routine and reverence. Like the brew, it settles. You, warms you, prepares you. The prayer ends. You bow your head, and when you open your eyes again, the mug is empty. Later, after prayers have dissolved into the hush of late afternoon, you find yourself back in the refectory, elbows on the long wooden table, hands cradling a third cup of the day. This one's gone cool, not cold, just tepid. Like a bath left waiting too long. You take a sip. It's bold. That's the polite word. You glance at the monk across from you. Brother Joseph. Thin, serene, and far too accustomed to this drink. He raises an eyebrow at your expression and says, deadpan, it's an acquired disappointment. You cough into, your sleeve, trying not to laugh. Because honestly, you were starting to wonder, did they like it? Did anyone? The short answer, probably not. The longer one, they respected it. Because this wasn't about liking in the way you like a donut or a midday nap. This was about ritual and austerity. And pretending just a little that your brown liquid was something cosmopolitan and exotic. You sip again, steeling yourself. This batch is strong. Too strong, maybe. There's a slight grittiness to it, like someone accidentally stirred in the floor. Brother Joseph, watching your face, leans in. We tried adding wood ash once. You blink? For flavor? No, he says dryly. For fiber. You nod. Solemnly, as if that makes sense. It's here, in this shared absurdity, that the humor begins to emerge. Not loud, not mocking, but gentle, sly, and always a little self-deprecating. Monks, after all, were human. They weren't blind to the limitations of lentil-based beverages. They just happened to embrace those limitations with the same passion. Resolve they gave to growing turnips or copying out the Psalms. Drink enough, says Joseph, and eventually you stop noticing the taste. Or caring. And yet, they kept brewing. Because sometimes pretending was enough. You see, while the monasteries weren't known for lavish comforts, they weren't strangers to small indulgences. A drop of beet syrup here. A pinch of dried fruit. There. And when someone could sneak a pinch of carob, a sliver of fig, or even a whisper of cinnamon into the brew, well, that was a feast day in liquid form. Some even documented their attempts. There's one 18th century recipe from a monastery near Płock that includes toasted rye, ground lentils, a tiny measure of honeycomb only during Easter, and a final twist of dried mushroom powder. Yes, mushroom for depth. Historians still argue whether that was culinary genius or a desperate attempt to cover the taste of scorched legumes. You sip again and think, maybe both. And then comes the taste test. The most feared moment in any monk's day. You're invited to participate in today's. A few brothers gather near the hearth, each with a steaming mug and an expression that says, I'm doing this out of obedience, not desire. One monk, clearly the instigator, holds up a slip of parchment. Today's blend, he says, is lentils, split peas, a hint of barley, and chicory root scavenged from the eastern fence line. There's a collective pause. Someone mutters, we're all going to die. Another monk raises his mug to a dignified passing. You sip. Everyone sips. No one speaks. Then, tastes like wet rope, one offers. Better than the time we tried nettle. Oh, don't remind me. I still have flashbacks. But through the mock complaints and dramatic sighs, there's something else. Like fondness. They know it's not good. But they also know it's theirs. And in that quiet, communal suffering, they find laughter. Not belly laughs, but gentle smiles, raised eyebrows. The kind of humor you earn from doing something hard. Together, again and again. Still better than real coffee, says Joseph with a wink. You squint at him. Really? He shrugs. No, but it's holier. And somehow, in that moment, you believe him. Because this isn't just about a drink. It's about a habit, a rhythm. A ritual so familiar that even its flaws feel like old friends. You don't love the brew, but you love the moment it creates. You take another sip. It still tastes like lentils pretending to be something else. But now, it also tastes like patience and warmth. And that specific kind of friendship that grows between people who've quietly agreed not to mention the flavor out loud anymore. As evening gathers like a heavy robe around the monastery, you walk the cloisters with your cup in hand. The cold bites a little sharper now. The windows flicker with firelight. Somewhere, a novice is reciting verses, his voice high and soft. You pause near the chapel door, looking up at the stone arch. Carved into the lintel is a simple Latin phrase, frustra, fit per plura quod potest fieri perposura. It is vain to do with more what can be done with less, and there it is. The motto of lentil coffee, really. You sip the last of your cup. Cold now, chalky, and you smile. You wake early again the next day, before the first bell, guided by the moonlight and the rhythmic snoring of Brother Mikawa down the corridor. You wrap your robe tighter around your shoulders, not because it helps against the draft, because it doesn't, but because it feels like a small, silent shield against what you're about to experience. Breakfast. And with it, the odd and oddly endearing wonders of monastic cuisine. Today, you're skipping the coffee for a moment to sample the rest of the monastery's culinary experiments. Because if lentil brew taught you anything, it's that the monks were masters of the improbable meal. You sit at the long wooden table as bowls are brought out, each one more curious than the last. First, beet syrup wine. Yes, wine. Technically, it shimmers a dull garnet in your chipped clay cup, thick as cough syrup, with a smell somewhere between damp cellar and overachieving salad dressing. You take a sip. It's sweet, shockingly sweet, and then sour. Like the beet itself remembered something traumatic halfway through the fermentation process. But the warmth that blooms in your chest afterward feels almost medicinal, like you've been quietly scolded by a root vegetable with healing powers. Next comes acorn soup. You brace yourself. The color is a dismal beige, the texture like someone tried to boil sandpaper. But it's surprisingly hearty, earthy, with a strange bitter tang that makes your tongue curl at the edges. Brother Jan says they soak the acorns in lime water for 3 days to remove the tannins. He says it with such pride, you feel obligated to finish the bowl. Then there's the oat porridge with pickled plum, a breakfast classic that deserves a sitcom of its own. The porridge is thick enough to mortar bricks. The plum, suspiciously purple and squished beyond recognition, adds a sudden sharp zing with each bite. It's a culinary jump scare. And yet, not bad. You glance around the table and realize something funny. Everyone's eating slowly, carefully, but with the same meditative calm you've seen in prayer. Every meal, no matter how strange or simple, is treated as a kind of reverence. Even when the ingredients come from the bottom of the barrel, sometimes literally, you whisper to Brother Joseph, "How did someone think of this?" He gestures at the plum. A mistake, probably. He gestures at the soup. A dare, definitely. Then he raises his mug. But we give thanks anyway. It's not just the taste, it's the effort. These dishes weren't made with abundance. They were born of ingenuity, discipline, and an almost theatrical commitment to not wasting anything. In a world where luxury meant salt and feast days meant honey, even the strangest concoctions earn their place at the table. Historians still argue whether these monastic meals were intended to test the flesh or merely stretch the pantry. Some records hint at a kind of culinary philosophy. Food should nourish, never distract. The stranger the flavor, the less your mind wandered. You weren't here for indulgence. You were here to chew, slowly, with purpose, and chew you do. After the meal, as dishes are cleared and wiped with coarse cloths, you return inevitably to the kitchen. The coffee is on again. Today's blend includes toasted rye and a whisper of dried carrot shavings. It smells marginally better than yesterday's. You help stir the pot while Brother Marek hums a familiar tune that may or may not be the Gregorian chant equivalent of "Don't Stop Believing." You take your mug outside this time, into the garden, where the sun is finally doing its job. Bare trees stand like sentinels, branches creaking in the breeze. Birds hop across the frozen soil, pecking at last season's regrets. You sit on the bench near the rosemary bush, sip your brew, and think about beet syrup. You decide you kind of miss it already. Because here's the thing, the monks weren't just eating to survive. They were creating a kind of quiet performance. A ceremony of small things. They turned dried plums and over-roasted lentils into something resembling a feast. Not because it tasted great, but because it meant something. Each dish, each drink, told a story of patience, of resourcefulness, of contentment found not in having more, but in making the most of less. You look into your cup. There's a bit of rye floating at the top, like a tired breadcrumb on vacation. You swirl it gently, watching the liquid darken slightly in the morning. Light. It doesn't taste like coffee, not really. But it tastes like here. And that's enough. You sip. You watch the garden. You breathe. And for a moment, between the bitter rye and the sweet memory of pickled plum, you feel full. By now, the lentil brew has woven itself into your days like a well-worn thread binding mornings to chores, prayers to quiet hours, mealtimes to stillness. You no longer question its flavor. You barely even flinch when someone mentions experimenting with juniper bark. You've crossed over from curious guest to honorary mug, at least in your devotion to this strange, steaming ritual. But today, something feels different. You wake to find the corridors shrouded in a deeper hush than usual. No clanging bowls, no humming from the kitchen, not even the soft swish of robes down the hallway. You pad down to the cloister and find the monks seated already, each with a mug in front of them, untouched, waiting. You take your place, and that's when it hits you. Silence. Not the usual monastic silence, the calm, respectful quiet broken only by prayers and soft footfalls. No, this is ceremonial silence, intentional, dense like snow-packed cloth. A silence that makes your own breathing feel like it's interrupting something sacred. This is the silent brew. Once a week, the monks partake in their lentil coffee without a single word. No jokes, no raised eyebrows. Just the drink, the hands, that made it, and the quiet rhythm of sipping. It's not a rule so much as a tradition, a way to reset, to remind themselves that even this humble concoction can be holy when approached with care. You lift your cup, steam rising in the pail. Morning light, and take a slow sip. It's hot, thick, slightly gritty. A blend of barley, lentils, and what might be roasted buckwheat. No carob today. No clever additions. Just the base ingredients, stripped bare and boiled with reverence. You let the taste linger. It's not good, but it is. Honest. Without the banter, without the comparisons to tree bark or fermented sadness, the brew tastes different. Not better. Not worse. Just more present. You're not performing. You're just being. Sitting in stillness. Letting the warmth move through you like a whispered chant. Across the table, a novice fumbles his mug slightly, spilling a few drops onto the linen. He freezes. No one reacts. The silence absorbs the moment like the cloth absorbs the spill quietly. Without judgment. It's easy, in modern life, to fill every pause with sound. To narrate, explain, soften the edges of silence with commentary. But here, in this room, you learn something monks have known for centuries. That stillness is not emptiness. It's attention. It's choosing not to speak so you can better hear. In that silence, even lentil brew becomes something close to profound. You stare into your cup. The grounds have begun to settle in little spirals, like tiny galaxies forming at the bottom. You swirl the mug gently, watching them shift. This, you realize, is what the monks meant by treating the mundane as sacred. Not because the brew is miraculous, but because you're paying attention. Historians still argue whether these silent rituals originated as spiritual discipline, or just a creative way to avoid morning complaints. Some records suggest they emerged during Lent, when even conversation was considered a form of indulgence. Others hint that silence simply made the brew more bearable. No, one wants to be reminded that they're drinking beanless bean juice. Take another sip. Eyes closed now. The flavor grounds you earthy, smoky, with a trace of something almost metallic. Maybe that's the buckwheat. Or maybe it's just the inside of the old kettle finally expressing its personality. The meal passes slowly. No rush. No glances at clocks. Just the scrape of spoons, the shifting of robes, and the occasional clearing of a throat held in too long. When the mugs are empty, they're stacked in silence. No clinking. Just gentle placement on the wooden counter, like laying stones on a shrine. You rise and follow the others outside into the cold stillness of the garden. The sky is a pale, luminous gray, hinting at snow. No one speaks. No one needs to. The breath of every monk curls into the air like smoke from a single, shared fire. You stand near the rosemary bush again, now rimmed with frost, and wrap your hands around your mug's remaining warmth. It's almost gone. Just a sliver of liquid left, cooled and thick with sediment. You sip it anyway. You've learned not to waste. You've learned that even the dregs have something to teach you. And then, finally, the bell rings. A soft chime. The kind that doesn't shatter the silence but lifts it, gently, like the slow closing of a book. The day resumes. Chores, prayers, parchment to be copied.
Floors to be swept.
But you carry that silence with you now, like the aftertaste of the brew bitter, earthy, and unexpectedly calming. Back in the kitchen, Brother Marek is already prepping tomorrow's batch. He says nothing, just nods at your mug, and you set it beside the others. No words. Just thanks. Later that week, the wind shifts. A storm's rolling in from the Carpathians' gray skies and flurries swirling like flour across the flagstones. Inside, the kitchen grows busier than usual. Not frantic, nothing here is ever frantic, but focused. Measured. You step in to find a new monk crouched beside the stove, coaxing a low flame beneath the blackened kettle. Today's brew smells ... different ... not bad. Just unfamiliar. Brother Tadeusz straightens up and hands you a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside, a mix of roasted leaves, curled roots, and something that looks suspiciously like shredded tree. Bark. Guest blend, he explains, without further context. You eye the ingredients. Did we run out of lentils? No, he says. We're experimenting. And suddenly, you're pulled into a quiet world of caffeine substitutes, a whole subterranean history of monks, farmers, and herbalists across continents brewing anything that could simulate a wakeful moment. Because while Polish monks were steeping lentils and rye, their counterparts in Germany were brewing up roasted chicory. In France, it was dandelion root, its bitterness praised for moral clarity and intestinal honesty. Further afield in Ethiopia, people chewed fermented coffee leaves for a slow, muted buzz. And in parts of China, Buddhist monks drank infusions of ginseng and dried tea flowers to steady the spirit, without igniting the ego. Historians still argue whether these caffeine alternatives were driven more by practicality or ideology. Some say it was simple economics, real coffee was expensive and hard to preserve without turning rancid. Others argue it was spiritual discipline. Caffeine too easily stirred the blood, woke the flesh when the soul should lead. Better to find gentler stimulants or none at all. You sit at the table and take a sip of today's guest blend. It's single quotes S. Smoky, very smoky, a little bitter. The bark, you suspect, is doing most of the heavy lifting. Somewhere in the background, a note of clove. Or maybe that's just your hopeful imagination projecting. Brother Tadeusz watches your face. Not bad? You consider your answer. Not bad. He nods solemnly. High praise. You look around and realize every monk has a slightly different mug today. The usual uniformity has given way to a mini flurry of preference. One brother stirs in a spoonful of oat gruel for body. Another has a slice of dried apple soaking like a lonely tea bag. Joseph crushes dried mint into his cup, swirling it with the gravitas of a monk performing a minor sacrament. This, you realize, is more than improvisation. It's expression. In a life bound by rules, hours, prayers, silence, this cup is a little island of choice. Even if the base is humble, the additions are personal. You might not get to pick your robe or your meal, but you can choose whether or not to steep a piece of roasted chestnut in your barley chickpea infusion. It's a kind of low-stakes rebellion. You try another sip. Still smoky, still barky. But, oddly warming. Outside, the snow begins to stick. Brother Merrick says it will be a long night, and so, naturally, the kitchen plans another batch. Evening blends are different, thicker, milder, often sweetened with a pinch of parsnip syrup if it can be spared. You help grind roasted lentils and rye, mix in a sliver of dried beet, and watch the pot come to a slow boil. This is how monks prepare for winter. Not with haste, but with heat. As the brew bubbles, you stir slowly, watching the surface ripple. The steam carries memories now of barley days, chicory afternoons, and that one regrettable juniper bark incident. And as always, it anchors you. The conversation turns to the Jesuits. "Ah," says Brother Jan, setting down his cup, "the original coffee smugglers." He's only half joking. The Jesuits, with their vast missionary networks, helped bring coffee into Europe through academic and ecclesiastical backchannels. Some praised it as a devout drink, better than wine, less risky than ale. Others, particularly in northern orders, saw it as dangerous, a stimulant for the senses, a temptation in a cup. You sip again. This cup, at least, is not tempting anyone. Still, the global connections are clear. The idea of brewing something dark and bitter in the morning is a universal ritual, one that's echoed from Japanese tea ceremonies to Ethiopian coffee circles to this little Polish monastery with its lentil and bark bouquet, even without caffeine. The act holds power. Sometimes, Brother Joseph muses, I think the drink doesn't matter at all. It's the pause. You nod. That feels true, because whether you're sipping espresso in Naples, butter tea in Tibet, or fake coffee on a cold wooden bench in the middle of nowhere, it's the moment that matters. The stillness, the shared breath, the warmth between your hands. Your cup is nearly empty. The bark has settled to the bottom like the bones of an idea that didn't quite make it. But still, you feel grounded, steady. The storm outside rattles the windows. Inside, you top off your cup, add a dried cranberry for bravery, and raise it in silent toast to centuries of sleepy monks who knew that the best way to start the day wasn't with a jolt, but with a quiet, steaming ritual they could call their own. The storm continues into the next day, blanketing the monastery in snow thick enough to mute even the bells. Everything's slower footsteps, chores, breath. It feels like time itself has been wrapped in wool and told to hush. You find yourself in the cloister, brushing snow off a bench with your sleeve, your now familiar mug of hot lentil brew steaming gently in the stillness. Today's blend is heavier on the roasted barley, with a surprising splash of turnip peel. You're not sure if that was intentional or just a storage mishap, but you drink it anyway. It's oddly comforting, like sipping an apology. As you stare into the swirl of snow, Brother Jan settles beside you, cloak pulled tight. He sips from his own mug, gives a satisfied grunt, and mutters, "You know, the Jesuits practically colonized half the coffee world." You blink. "Excuse me?" He smiles faintly. Coffee didn't just walk into Europe. It came on ships, on trade routes. It followed priests and silk and sugar and sin. And suddenly, your quiet monastery brew feels connected to a much wider story. You follow him back inside, down a narrow hallway lined with dusty shelves and forgotten ledger books. He pulls one down, a heavy folio with frayed corners and a spine that sighs when opened. Inside are record shipments, letters, trade accounts, all in the careful ink of Jesuit scribes. Arabica arrived in Poland through the back door. Jan explains, through Vienna mostly. And Vienna got it from Venice, and Venice got it from the Ottomans. Historians still argue whether the Jesuits embraced coffee because of its intellectual stimulation or despite it. It helped their scholars stay awake, certainly. And as missionaries, they carried it with them, introducing it to parts of Asia, Africa, the Americas. But they also debated it. Hotly. Was it a sin? A stimulant? A slippery slope toward indulgence? Some records describe it as a liquid that sharpens the mind but not the soul. Others say it made for clear contemplation and regular digestion, which is the kind of ringing endorsement you could only get from a 17th century Jesuit with constipation. You sit down beside the old books and flip through letters that talk of coffee in the same breath as cocoa and tobacco and silk. Luxury imports, symbols of status, not for monks in silent Polish hills, but for bishops, traders, academics. And yet, even here, in this remote monastery, the drink left ripples. Brother Jan shows you a marginal note in Latin scrawled into the corner of a prayer manual. Si non habemus caffea, fabum uramus. If we have no coffee, let us roast beans. Not scripture, but close enough. This kind of quiet improvisation mirroring the wider world through smaller, stranger means wasn't limited to monks. Peasants had their own versions. Villagers steeped roasted chestnuts, sunflower seeds, even brown breadcrumbs. There were brews that tasted like hay and brews that tasted like regret, but all of them chased the same thing, the feeling of comfort, of ritual, of warmth at dawn. You sip your brew again. It's cooled slightly. The turnip peel makes it complex. You close the book. The air smells of dust and ink and smoke. Did the monks ever fight about it? You ask. Real coffee versus fake? Brother Jan chuckles. No fists, just sighs. He goes on to explain that while some monasteries eventually accepted real coffee, others clung fiercely to substitutes, not just out of habit, but out of principle. To accept imported coffee was to flirt with vanity, to inch toward the secular world. To reject it was to cling to simplicity. To humility. It wasn't a debate about flavor. It was a debate about focus. And in that sense, your lentil brew is a quiet rebellion, a refusal to follow trends, a refusal to trade simplicity for stimulation. You finish your cup and rinse it in the stone basin outside the kitchen. The water's cold enough to sting, but you welcome the jolt. It reminds you that you're awake, not because of caffeine, but because of routine. Back in the kitchen, the monks are prepping the evening's blend. Roasted grains, a pinch of sage, and mysteriously a spoonful of mashed dried pear. You raise an eyebrow. Brother Marek shrugs. We're innovating. You realize then that this whole ritual, this entire tradition, is both ancient and constantly new. The ingredients change. The weather changes. Even the monks over decades come and go. But the act remains. The boiling, the sipping, the silent, shared moment. And whether it's lentils or Jesuit imported beans, what matters most isn't the brew. It's the pause. The warmth. The choosing to be still. You're beginning to suspect the monks are messing with you. Today's blend is daring. A rich, deeply toasted mix of lentils and rye. Yes, but someone has slipped in a few fragments of dried onion skin. You smell it before it hits your tongue, a savory edge that makes your eyes water slightly and your soul reconsider its life choices. You stare into your mug. Deeply betrayed across the table, Brother Joseph raises his own cup with exaggerated solemnity. For the digestion, he says, as if invoking a benediction, you sip, you regret, but you also admire the sheer monastic commitment to resourcefulness. Because at this point, it's not about what works, it's about what's possible. Still, the question lingers. Did they actually enjoy this? Or was it just another vow wrapped in steam? Some answers lie in the scraps of letters and journals tucked away in monastery archives. Monks were supposed to be obedient, restrained, focused. But between the lines, you catch glimpses of hesitation of honest, human reactions to the beverages they brewed daily. One scribe in 1758 described his morning cup as earthy, persistent, and occasionally resembling roasted leather. Another, in a marginal note beside a psalm, wrote simply, "Too much barley." Never again, and yet they kept drinking it. Why? Historians still argue whether this persistence was habit or devotion or perhaps a strange blend of both. Some point to the deeply ingrained nature of ritual in monastic life. Once something became a pattern, it took on a gravity of its own. To question the lentil brew was not to question flavor, it was to question continuity. And others believe it was pride. The kind of quiet, stubborn pride that says, we don't need imported luxuries. We make do. We create our own comforts. Even if those comforts smell faintly like burnt soup. You ask Brother Marek, mid-pour, did anyone ever just say, you know what? This is awful? He thinks for a moment, then nods. Brother Cyril once refused. Puck-up, said he would rather drink boiled moss. You pause. And did he? 2 weeks straight? And? He learned humility. The laughter that bubbles up is light, warm like the rare moment when the sun cuts through the high windows of the cloister and pools onto the flagstones. These monks aren't humorless. Far from it. They just prefer their jokes steeped in patience and delivered with the dryness of a 3-day biscuit. You walk with Brother Joseph toward the granary, where sacks of dried grains and legumes sit stacked like earthy treasure. He opens a small chest and lifts out a faded cloth bundle. Inside, coffee beans. Real ones. He grins. For feast days, he whispers. Or if the bishop comes. You hold a few in your hand. They smell divine, sharp, deep. You feel like you've stumbled across something illicit, and in a way, you have. These beans represent everything the lentil brew does not. Luxury, foreign trade, indulgence. Caffeine, you ask if he ever sneaks. Some into his cup, he tilts his head. Sometimes, he says, a pinch, for memory. Because the truth is, the monks weren't immune to longing, to curiosity, to the tiny ache of what if. But rather than give in fully, they incorporated those desires into their discipline. A little coffee, once in a while. A little sweetness when the calendar allowed. Just enough to remember what the world tasted like. You walk back to the kitchen, still holding the memory of those beans in your palm. The day stretches on in its quiet rhythm. Tasks, prayer, reflection. And come evening, you gather again for the last cup of the day. This one's milder, no onion. Thank heaven. It's lentils and barley, toasted gently with a dusting of elderflower from the apothecary's shelf. You sip. It's soft. A little sweet. A little smoky. And in that sip, you feel the echo of thousands of others, monks before you, monks long. Gone. All holding their chipped mugs in candlelight and watching the same steam curl skyward. They might not have loved every brew, but they loved what it meant. And now, so do you. It begins with a whisper. A rumor passed between monks with the caution typically reserved for Lent violations or sightings of saints in window frost. The monastery might be getting real coffee. Not just the reserved sack for feast days. Not. just a stray bean here or there smuggled into the blend for aromatic purposes. But actual, regular, steaming, aromatic, real-deal coffee, you blink at Brother Jan as he says it. How? You ask, eyes narrowing. He leans in, almost gleefully. Conspiratorial. Trade routes. A cousin of the abbot. Shipments from dusk. He taps his nose. Changes are coming. You look around the room, the kitchen, with its familiar wooden paddle, the roasting trays, the cupboard full of legumes, and it hits you. You might be drinking one of the last batches of lentil brew ever made in this place. It's not a sudden revolution. Of course, this is a monastery. Change happens here like water-shaped stone, slowly, silently, with an occasional dramatic flood when someone forgets to close the root cellar. But still, the shift is coming. And as you stir today's pot lentils, barley, a curious handful. Of toasted sorghum, you feel a quiet pang. Because for all the jokes, for all the burnt aftertastes and surprise mushroom notes, this drink has become something sacred. It's odd and awkward and occasionally terrible, but it's yours. That night, the abbot calls a quiet assembly. You gather in the refectory where the candles flicker and the air smells faintly of ash and thyme. He clears his throat. The monks. Lean forward. It's been offered, he says, a supply line. Good beans, reasonable trade. There's a long pause. We will vote. A murmur, barely audible, but heavy with weight. And so the monks do what they've done for centuries. When faced with uncertain change, they talk. Carefully, respectfully, in Latin mostly, with side comments and polish when someone mispronounces an adjective and the room snorts quietly. Some speak of practicality. Real coffee is easier to brew, less effort, more consistent. Lentils, after all, were never meant for sipping. Others defend the brew. It's tradition, they say it's humble. It's ours. Historians still debate when and where the last monastic lentil brews were quietly replaced by coffee. Some believe it happened all at once, spurred by trade. Others argue that even after coffee was accepted, monks continued to make the old blend in secret for themselves. As a reminder, back in the kitchen, Brother Marek pours you a cup. He hasn't voted. He won't say which way he's leaning. Take a sip. It's familiar now. Comforting. It tastes like cold mornings and parchment ink, like silence and burnt barley. Like every small thing you've come to cherish in this place. If they switch, you say, will you miss it? He shrugs. Maybe, maybe not. Then, after a pause, but I'll still remember how it made us sit together. Every day. Without fail. That evening, you walk the snowy paths with your mug, watching your footprints fill in behind you. The stars are sharp and clear, the night brittle as glass. And in your hands, the warmth seeps through the clay like a heartbeat. You think of the monks before you, those who invented the brew, who stirred lentils with warm wooden spoons, who passed on the strange recipes like sacred scrolls. You wonder how many mornings started with a grimace and ended with a smile. How many sleepy prayers were helped along by not quite coffee. And you wonder, too, how long it will take before this tradition fades, not out of malice, but simply because it's time. Because even sacred routines can end, but not tonight. Tonight. The brew is still here. The monks are still gathering. The steam still rises, and you drink slowly, as if preserving something that might never come again. The vote happens quietly the next morning, as all meaningful things tend to in this monastery, without fanfare, without urgency, just a small wooden box placed at the front of the chapel, beside the reliquary and the candles that have been burning. Since someone remembered to light them, each monk slips in a folded piece of parchment. One side says Kawa Pradziwa Real Coffee. The other, simply Posostage We Stay. You don't vote, of course. You're a guest in this rhythm, not a decision maker. But the weight of it settles over breakfast like a heavy linen cloth. There's no talking. Just the clinking of spoons and the quiet anticipation of change. You drink your cup lentils and a dash of roasted barley, today with a suggestion of aniseed. It's good. Well, not good, but you've stopped noticing the difference between tolerable and interesting. It's become familiar, reliable, like a hymn you didn't like at first, but now hum without realizing. Later, Brother Jan finds you in the corridor near the chapel. He doesn't say the results. He doesn't have to. He simply hands you a small linen sack, soft, fragrant, warm from his hands. Inside are coffee beans, real ones. Shiny, dark, aromatic. The bishop's envoy left them this morning, he says, voice quiet. The first delivery. You nod, cradling the sack like it might vanish if you blink too hard. Are we ... Switching? You ask. He smiles, wry. We'll see. Because change in a monastery is rarely sudden. The lentil brew won't disappear overnight. Even now, Brother Marek is roasting a fresh batch, stirring it with the same flat wooden paddle he's used for 30 years. He hums softly. You think it might be a farewell tune. He gestures for you to add a pinch of something. You reach for the barley but hesitate. Instead, you sprinkle in a few crushed coriander seeds just to see. The scent is surprising citrusy, warm, almost playful. He raises an eyebrow. Why not? You say. Historians still argue how long lentil coffee lingered after real beans became available. Some claim it vanished quickly, replaced by convenience and taste. Others believe it lived on in pockets quiet monasteries, humble villages, old monks who didn't want to forget what making do once meant. You watch the brews steep. The coriander dances in the steam, mingling with the toasted scent. Brother Marek pours 2 mugs. You take yours to the window and watch the snowfall ease up for the first time in days. The sky softens. The icicles drip. You sip. It's not the best cup you've had, but it feels like the right one for today. You look over and see another monk grinding real beans in a small hand mill, careful, focused. It smells divine. It smells like new chapters, but no one's throwing away the old ones. Later, in the refectory, 2 kettles sit side by side, one with the traditional brew, one with real coffee. The mugs are the same. The silence, the same. The choice? Yours. You. Fill your mug from the lentil pot. You know the flavor. The way it builds, the way it settles, the way it lingers. Brother Joseph joins you. You didn't try the coffee? He asks, nodding toward the other pot. Not yet, you reply. He nods. Good. Let it earn its place. The monks sip in silence. A few try the real thing. There are raised eyebrows. Someone even whispers, luxurious. But no one judges. No one boasts. Because here, preference is never the point. Only presence. You take another sip. The coriander was a nice touch. Unexpected. A final flourish on a brew that's been years in the making. And tomorrow? Maybe coffee. Maybe not. Maybe both. Because in this monastery, tradition isn't something fossilized. It's something living, breathing, sipped slowly from chipped mugs with cold hands and warm hearts. You leave your empty cup on the windowsill. The snow is melting now. The garden, beneath its white blanket, stirs. And so do you. The final morning arrives with no announcements, no sudden shifts in routine, just the quiet consistency of cloistered life. You wake to the sound of the bell, the hush of snow now thinning on the rooftops, and the creak of floorboards as monks shuffle past your door, robes swaying like the tide. Today, something's different, though you can't quite name it. It's not louder, not faster. If anything, it's slower, softer. Like everyone has decided to walk a little more gently. In the kitchen, The old iron pot is already heating over the fire. You half expect to see a shining percolator, a whiff of real Arabica, a jubilant monk in a bean print apron. But no, there's Brother Marek, bent over the same roasting pan, toasting lentils and barley with a patience that defies modern logic. You join him. Still making the brew? You ask. He shrugs. For those who still want it. You smile. You want it. Today's blend is a farewell of sorts lentils, rye, a whisper of carob, and just the tiniest pinch of real coffee ground so finely it disappears into the mix. A peace offering, a blend of old and new. The kind of cup that doesn't demand loyalty, just attention. You help ladle the brew into the kettle, stir it slow, and listen to the hiss and bubble of the simmering water. You don't talk. You don't need to. Your hands already know what to do. Your body knows how long to wait. Even your nose can now recognize the moment it's ready. You pour the mugs. One for you. One for Brother Marek. One for the small row of chipped waiting vessels lined up for the others. And when the monks file in, each takes a mug, some from the lentil pot, some from the fresh brewed coffee sitting modestly at the far end of the counter. No fanfare, no division. Just choice. You sit together in the refectory as you always do. No one says which they've chosen. No one needs to. Each sip carries its own memory. Brother Joseph leans over. You going to try the real thing before? You leave? You nod. Eventually, maybe tomorrow. He smirks. That's how they get you. You both laugh quietly. The kind of laugh that vibrates more in your chest than your throat. The kind that's less about humor and more about shared. Silence made soft with time. You raise your mug. It's warm, familiar, just bitter enough to feel honest. The meal passes in gentle clatter and quiet nods. And when the mugs are empty, no one rushes. No one bolts from their bench to wash up. You all sit there for a while, letting the steam fade, letting the moment stretch just a little longer. Because what you're drinking isn't just a brew. It's 1,000 mornings in a cup. It's snow against stone. It's silence that becomes friendship. It's the lesson you didn't know you needed, that there's grace in imperfection, that you don't need luxury to find meaning. That sometimes it's enough to sip something strange, made by quiet hands, surrounded by people who understand. And as you walk the cloister one last time, mug in hand, the wind picks up a little, brushing snow off the ledges and carrying with it the faint, comforting scent of roasted barley and carob. You pause by the rosemary bush, still frosted, still fragrant, and take one last sip. Still warm. Still home. And now the monastery fades. The fire dims. The snow falls softer. The last bell tolls in. The distance slow and steady, like the heartbeat of a place that asks nothing from you except to be here. You set your mug down, empty now, but somehow still full of something invisible. You stretch your fingers, feel the lingering heat, and let your shoulders sink. You've walked the stone corridors, heard the chants, shared silent meals, watched steam rise from chipped mugs while the world spun quietly outside. You've sipped something odd and beautiful, not because it tasted good, but because it mattered. Take a deep breath. Let the steam curl around your senses once more, the scent of roasted grains, the whisper of coriander, the faint sweetness of dried plum. You are far from the rush now, far from buzz and bustle and flashing screens. Here, there's only this, the stillness of ancient halls, the hush of falling snow, and the warmth of a cup filled with care. Let yourself lean into it. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your thoughts meander like monks walking slowly between prayers. You don't need answers tonight. You don't need clarity or caffeine. Just the rhythm of your breath, the weight of the blankets, the gentle hum of imagined bells far, far away. Sleep is close now. As close as a hand-wrapped mug on a winter morning. Let go. The brew will be here tomorrow. The silence always.